Chapter 1. Temperance Neal had been inside the Duke of Marden's library for approximately 6 minutes, which was 5 minutes longer than she had expected to last without saying something that would end her visit, her prospects, and quite possibly her reputation in the county. The trouble was the lamp. It sat on the reading desk like a decorative afterthought, its brass body angled to illuminate the wall behind the chair rather than the page beneath it. A beautiful lamp, an expensive lamp. A lamp that had been placed by someone who understood ornament and had never, in their life, tried to read. Temperance had been recommended to the Duke of Marden by his retiring housekeeper, Mrs. Cope, who had spent 30 years managing the household and had confided to Temperance's late father, over a fence, that the house was beautifully maintained and entirely uncomfortable, and that someone with an architectural eye might do what 30 years of polite suggestion had not. Mrs. Cope had retired to her sister's cottage in Whitby before the visit was arranged, which meant she would face no consequences for the recommendation, which was, Temperance suspected, the point. The Duke was showing her the library himself. He had not delegated the tour to a servant, which was unusual, and he had not filled the silence with pleasantries, which was more unusual still. He walked beside her with the absolute composure of a man who has been watched his entire life and has learned to give the watching nothing to find. He was tall, dark-haired, and precisely assembled. He had gray-green eyes that recorded everything and revealed nothing. He had not smiled once. Something about the far corner of his mouth suggested that smiling was a concept he had encountered in theory and set aside for a more appropriate occasion, one that had not yet arrived in 32 years. "Well?" he said. Temperance looked at the lamp. She looked at the Duke. She considered, briefly, the social mathematics of her situation. A woman of no fortune, no particular beauty, and no powerful connections, standing in the private library of the most important man in the county, being asked a direct question by a man who appeared to mean it. She answered it. "The reading lamp is in the wrong position," she said. "It illuminates the wall. The chair should be angled 15 degrees toward the window, and the lamp moved to the left side of the desk, which would put the light where a reader actually needs it. The shelving is excellent, but the upper reaches are inaccessible without a ladder that does not appear to exist, which means half your collection is decorative. The rug is the wrong color for the room, and the fire is too far from the reading chair for a library that is used in winter, which suggests this room was designed for summer, or designed by someone who did not read in it, or both." The Duke regarded her with an expression she could not categorize. He was not offended, he was not amused. He was something else, something she had not seen on a face before, and the closest she could come to naming it was the look of a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time and has only just realized he was doing it. "You are the first person," he said, "who has not told me the library is magnificent. The proportions are magnificent. The collection is magnificent. The lamp is a catastrophe." Something at the far corner of his mouth shifted, considered arriving, and decided against it. An almost smile. The ghost of an expression his face appeared to be rehearsing without his permission. "Is there more?" he said. There was a great deal more. They walked the house for 2 hours, just the two of them, with Mr. Jonas Pilbeam, the Duke's private secretary, trailing 3 paces behind with a leather notebook he had produced from his coat pocket, with the quiet intensity of a man who has just discovered his profession has a purpose. She told him the breakfast room table was positioned against the north wall, while the morning light fell uselessly on an empty stretch of floor. She told him the drawing room furniture was arranged as though the room were expecting a funeral rather than a conversation. Every chair facing the fireplace, no 2 seats close enough for a quiet word. She told him the garden was designed to be admired from the windows rather than walked in, and that a garden that served the house rather than the people in it was not a garden, but a painting with drainage problems. She told him these things because he asked, and because her father had raised her to believe that a question asked deserved an answer given, and because the Duke of Marden was looking at her as though every word she spoke was something he had been waiting to hear, and the looking was making her say things she would ordinarily have kept to herself, which was all of them, because Temperance Neal had spent 26 years keeping things to herself, and had developed a storage capacity that would have impressed a warehouse. She told him the corridor on the east side went dark after 4 o'clock because the windows faced the wrong direction and no one had thought to add a lamp table. She told him the long gallery's paintings were hung at a height suitable for a man of 6 feet and 3 inches, which meant everyone else in the county had been craning their necks for a generation. She told him the staircase window on the east landing was beautiful and useless, like a candle placed in a room no one entered. She told him these things while walking beside him, close enough that their sleeves occasionally brushed when they turned a corner, and each brush sent a small electrical fact through the fabric that she catalogued and filed and did not acknowledge, because acknowledging it would have required a category she did not possess. He stopped in the corridor outside the morning room. He turned to face her. He was very close because the corridor was narrow and because he was a tall man in a confined space, and confined spaces do not make allowances for dukes. "You see everything," he said. "I see what is there. That is not the same thing." "It is rarer than you imagine." "It is not rare. It is merely inconvenient. Most people can see what is there. They simply prefer not to mention it." He looked at her. She looked at him. The corridor was dim because the windows faced the wrong direction, as she had just informed him, and in the bad light his gray-green eyes were darker, closer to the color of deep water, and she was aware that she was cataloguing his eyes in the same systematic way she catalogued reading lamp positions, and she was aware that the cataloguing was not, strictly speaking, professional. "Pilbeam," the Duke said without turning, "how many observations has Miss Neal made?" Pilbeam consulted his notebook. 31, Your Grace. I have organized them by room." 31, the Duke repeated. He looked at Temperance. "In 2 hours." "Some rooms had more than one problem," Temperance said. "Most rooms had more than one problem." "Your house is very large." "It is." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, recognition. "You will come back." It was not a question, which should have irritated her. It did irritate her. It also made her pulse do something she could not attribute to the 3-mile walk, because the walk was over and the pulse was not. "I will come back for the library," she said. "The books, not the lamp." "The lamp will be corrected before your next visit. If you move it to the left side of the desk and angle the chair 15 degrees, the reading position will be adequate." "Adequate," the Duke said, and the almost smile returned, lingered at the left corner of his mouth for nearly 2 seconds, and withdrew. "I shall strive for adequate." She walked the 3 miles home to Neal Cottage in the late afternoon light, with her boots collecting mud and her mind collecting something else, something she could not shelve or catalog or position at the correct angle, something that sat in her chest like a lamp she had not yet found the right place for. She had £60 a year from her mother's settlement. She had a cottage with a leaking roof she could not afford to mend. She had her father's architectural eye and her mother's annotated book of household receipts, and a talent for seeing exactly what was wrong with any room she entered and saying so. She had never, until this afternoon, been listened to by someone who appeared to consider listening a form of relief. We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. Chapter 2. The Duke fixed the lamp. He also moved the chair. He also, Temperance discovered upon her return 3 days later, placed a copy of Johnson's dictionary on the reading table, open to the page for the word candid. She stood in the library looking at the dictionary, and her mouth did something she could not quite control, And she said to the empty room, "That is either very funny or very pointed, and I suspect it is both." "It is both," said the Duke from the doorway. She had not heard him arrive. He moved with the particular silence of a man who has learned that his footsteps carry weight he did not ask for. "The chair is angled as you specified. The lamp has been repositioned. Pilbeam supervised. He was very precise." "Pilbeam strikes me as a man who is always precise. He has been adequate for 7 years. You have made him exceptional. He has started a registry." "A registry?" "He calls it Miss Neal's Registry of Domestic Inadequacies. It has reached 9 pages. He is adding cross-references." Temperance looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at Temperance. She was wearing her gray wool, the one that had been her mother's, and her sturdy boots, and her hem carried evidence of the 3-mile walk, and her cheeks carried the color the cold had put there. And she was standing in a Duke's library without apology or ornament, and she was funny and plain and specific, and he was looking at her as though she were the most interesting problem he had ever encountered. And the looking was doing something to the architecture of her composure that she would need to examine later, in private, when his eyes were not that particular shade of gray-green, that was not one color, but several. "I have opinions about the shelving order," she said, because she needed to say something that was not about his eyes. "I would be astonished if you did not." Over the following 3 weeks, Temperance walked to Marden Hall 9 times. She refused the Duke's carriage twice, on the grounds that she was visiting a library, not being collected. The household changed around her, with the quiet efficiency of a house that has been waiting for someone to tell it what it needed. The breakfast table was moved to the east wall. The drawing-room chairs were rearranged for conversation. 2 elm benches appeared in the garden, facing outward toward the hills. Pilbeam's registry grew to 14 pages and acquired an index. On her 5th visit, the Duke asked her to stay for breakfast. Just the 2 of them, in the morning room, at the table she had repositioned. The curtains she would later criticize and be wrong about hung heavy and green at the windows. Morning light, the light she had liberated by moving the table, fell across the cloth and the plates and the 9 years out-of-fashion china that was, Temperance noticed, beautiful in the way that unfashionable things often are, which is to say, honestly. He buttered toast with the precision he applied to everything. She watched his hands, which she had not given herself permission to watch and which she was watching anyway, because his hands were capable and unhurried, and they held the butter knife the way they held everything, as though the thing in his grip were the only thing in the world that required attention. And she wondered, with a specificity that alarmed her, what it would be like to be held with that attention. And then she ate her toast, and it tasted like nothing, because her mouth was occupied with not saying things. "The marmalade is good," she said. "Mrs. Argent makes it. She has been waiting to be complimented on it for 6 years." "Then she should have served it 6 years ago." "She was not asked." "You did not ask your cook what she could make?" "I did not ask anyone anything, Miss Neal. That appears to have been the problem." The almost smile surfaced, held, retreated, but slowly this time, as though it were considering whether to stay, and the consideration was something new, something that had not been there a week ago. And Temperance looked at her toast, and her toast looked back, with the bland indifference of bread that has no idea it is sitting in the middle of something seismic. Then the Duke began anticipating her. She arrived on her 7th visit to find the gallery paintings rehung at a lower, more accessible height. She had not yet mentioned the paintings. She had intended to. She had, in fact, been looking forward to it, because the gallery required standing very near the Duke in order to point at things on the wall, and standing near the Duke had become, without her authorization, the part of each visit she thought about the most. She stood in the gallery looking at correctly positioned paintings and felt something she could not immediately name. It was adjacent to fury. It was adjacent to admiration. It was the specific frustration of a woman who has been robbed of an excuse she did not know she was making. And the excuse was, "I need to stand close to him to show him what is wrong with the paintings." There was nothing wrong with the paintings. They were perfect. He had listened so carefully to her principles that he could now predict what she would say, and he had said it for her. And she wanted to kill him and kiss him in approximately equal measure. And the fact that she was thinking the word kiss in a Duke's gallery at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning was a structural failure in her composure. She had no idea how to repair. "You rehung them," she said. "Pilbeam measured, I approved the heights." "They are correct." "Are you angry that they are correct?" "I am not angry." "You appear angry." "I am reassessing my schedule. Several of my planned observations are now redundant, which means I have time I had not accounted for, and unaccounted time makes me uncomfortable." The Duke looked at her. His eyes did the thing where they shifted from recording to something warmer, something she had begun to notice happened only when she said something that was simultaneously true and absurd, which was most of the things she said. "I could show you the East Wing," he said. "It has not been occupied in 6 years. I imagine it has a great many inadequacies." "How many rooms?" 14. "That should take approximately an hour and a half, which accounts for my surplus time. Lead the way." He led the way. The East Wing was cold and unused and beautiful in the particular way that abandoned rooms are beautiful, which is to say, full of potential and dust. She walked through it, assessing sight lines and window positions and the structural quality of the plasterwork, and he walked beside her, watching her assess. And the watching had a quality she was trying very hard not to name. In the third bedroom, her boot caught a loose floorboard. She stumbled, not badly, but his hand rose. It rose from his side and reached toward her shoulder and then stopped, mid-air, 2 inches from contact, and returned to his side with the visible discipline of a man who does not permit himself to do things without deciding to first. They both looked at the space where his hand had been. "The floorboard needs fixing," Temperance said. "Yes," he said, "the floorboard." The floorboard was not what either of them was talking about. In the 6th room, she found her father's work. A window frame, elegantly proportioned, with the particular balance of weight and light that Gilbert Neal had been known for. She stopped. She put her hand on the frame. "My father designed this window," she said. The Duke stood beside her. Very close, because the room was small, and because nearness had become, over the course of 4 weeks, a thing neither of them moved away from. "It is the best window in the house," he said. He always put the light in the right place. The sentence meant something else now. In the proximity. In the late afternoon gold. She was aware of his breathing and of her own, and of the fact that their breaths had fallen into the same rhythm, without either of them deciding to, which was the kind of synchronization her father would have called structural harmony, and which she called terrifying. She stepped back. She made an observation about the cornice. The cornice did not deserve the observation, but it received one anyway, because Temperance needed to say something that was not about the fact that she was standing in a room her father had touched, beside a man she wanted to touch, and cornices are safe. Cornices are architectural. Cornices do not make your pulse do things your competence cannot explain. She did not think about any of this until she was home at the cottage that evening, mending a stocking by candlelight and doing it badly because her hands kept stopping while the rest of her went somewhere she had not authorized. She was thinking about his hands. Not architecturally, not the proportion of finger to palm, though she had measured that too and found it correct. She was thinking about how they had rested at his sides while she examined the East Wing, patient and still, and how one of them had almost risen when she stumbled on a loose floorboard in the 3rd bedroom, almost reached for her, and then returned to his side with the visible discipline of a man who does not permit himself to do things without deciding to first. He had almost reached for her. She had noticed. He had noticed her noticing. Neither of them had said anything, because the saying would have changed the architecture of what was between them, and the architecture was load-bearing, and neither of them could afford for it to fall. She put down the stocking. She would not think about his hands. She thought about his hands. Then, one afternoon, in the morning room, she told him the curtains were too heavy. "No," he said. Temperance looked at him. He had never said no before. He had said the chair has always been in that position, which was a deferral. He had said the breakfast has been the same for 11 years, which was a defense. But he had never said the flat, brief, architectural word, no. And it landed in the room like a load-bearing wall she had not accounted for. "The northeast wind," he said, "comes through the gap between the main house and the east wing from November through March. Without those curtains, the morning room is uninhabitable. I know this because I spent the winter of 1812 in that room after my father died, and I learned the curtains before I learned the estate." She looked at the curtains. She looked at the gap between the wings. She looked at the Duke, who was standing with his hands behind his back and his jaw set with the steadiness of a man who is certain because he has earned his certainty the hard way, alone, at 20. "You are right," she said. "I know. You do not need to be pleased about it. I am not pleased. I am correct." He was pleased. She could see it in his shoulders, which had shifted approximately 2 degrees towards something that was, on a man of his temperament, indistinguishable from delight. She found this infuriating and beautiful in equal measure, and the beauty was the more infuriating part, because she had not given it permission to arrive. The next afternoon, in the garden, she stepped over the drainage channel along the western edge, misjudged the width, and felt her balance shift. The Duke caught her arm. His hand closed around her forearm above the glove, where the sleeve was thin enough that she felt each finger separately, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Her weight settled, her balance returned. His hand remained. 2 seconds, perhaps 3. Long enough for her pulse to do something her competence could not fix. Long enough for the warmth of his hand to travel through the cloth and settle somewhere in her ribs. Long enough for her to understand, with the clarity she usually reserved for sight lines and load-bearing walls, that she was in serious trouble. He released her arm. "The drainage channel should be narrower," he said, in the tone of a man who has decided a drainage channel is responsible for something it has nothing to do with. "Or bridged," Temperance said. Her voice was steady, which was a triumph of engineering over circumstance. "Or bridged," he agreed, and did not look at her for the next 11 minutes, which she counted, because counting was what she did when she could not think clearly, and her forearm still held the shape of his hand like a wall holds the shape of a removed painting. The Duke of Marden, for his part, spent those 11 minutes examining the channel with an attention it had never warranted. He had held many things in his life: deeds, reigns, the weight of a title given to him at 20. None of them had been anything like the forearm of a woman in a gray dress. None of them had made the rest of the afternoon seem too bright, too full of a thing he could not put in its proper category. And the Duke of Marden required categories the way other men required air. We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. Chapter 3. Lady Burleigh arrived on the 1st of November with the energy of a woman who has received intelligence worth traveling 40 miles to act upon. She was 83. She was the Duke's great-aunt on his father's side. She carried a walking stick she did not need and used primarily for emphasis. She had outlived 2 husbands, 4 cats, and the patience of every living relative except Prosper, whom she loved with the ferocity of a woman who had been waiting 3 decades for him to do something interesting. "I hear you have a woman reorganizing your breakfast," she said, settling into the drawing-room chair nearest the fire, which Temperance had moved 2 feet closer to the hearth and angled toward the window. "She has observations," the Duke said. "Are they good observations?" "They are correct observations. She told me the library lamp was a catastrophe." "It was a catastrophe. I have been saying so for 12 years. You said it was charming." "I lied. I am 83. I have earned the right to lie about lamps. Has she earned the right to tell you the truth about them? The Duke was quiet. His hand, resting on the arm of his chair, closed slowly and then opened again. Yes, he said. Lady Burleigh looked at her great-nephew with an expression that contained something she had been saving for 30 years. She picked up her walking stick. I should like to meet her, she said. And Prosper. A duke and an architect's daughter. You understand what the world will make of that. I have not proposed to her. No, you have reorganized your breakfast, rehung your paintings, and opened an uninhabited wing of your house so she would have something to criticize. These are not the actions of a man who is thinking about drainage. The Duke said nothing. Lady Burleigh had the decency not to smile, though the effort was visible. Temperance met Lady Burleigh the following afternoon in the library, where she had been arguing with Pilbeam about the shelving order. The argument had reached the stage where Pilbeam was holding a copy of Newton above his head like a man defending a position, and Temperance was pointing at the shelf with the certainty of a woman who knows she is right and finds the delay in everyone else's comprehension personally fatiguing. Miss Neal, Lady Burleigh said from the doorway, I have heard a great deal about you. Temperance saw a very small, very old woman with eyes like polished flint and a walking stick held at an angle that suggested it had recently been used to make a point. Lady Burleigh, she said, I have heard nothing about you, which I suspect is deliberate. Lady Burleigh smiled, not the diplomatic arrangement of features that passed for pleasure in aristocratic circles, but a real, full smile that remade her entire face. I like you, Lady Burleigh said. You have known me for 8 seconds. I am 83. I do not have time for a longer assessment. She sat in the reading chair, which was angled exactly as Temperance had specified, and looked at the lamps, which were positioned exactly as Temperance had recommended, and looked at Temperance, standing in the middle of it all, with Newton unresolved and her hem carrying mud. He has been asking that question for 15 years, Lady Burleigh said. Every new acquaintance, every dinner guest. What do you think of the house? And every person said it was magnificent, and he smiled and thanked them and forgot them. I did not say it was magnificent. No, you said the lamp was a catastrophe, and he has not recovered. Lady Burleigh placed both hands on the top of her walking stick. His father asked the same question. Every dinner, every new acquaintance. And every person said the house was magnificent, until one evening a woman told him the chimney in the east drawing room smoked when the wind changed. He married her within the season. Temperance's breath stopped. The question was never about the house, Lady Burleigh said. It was about finding the person brave enough to tell you what is wrong with your life. His father knew that. Prosper does not know it yet, but you answered a question he did not know he was asking, and I have waited 15 years to watch that happen. I am not, Temperance said, and her voice was steady because she required it to be, in any situation. I am an architect's daughter. He is a duke. The distance between those two facts is not something a lamp can bridge. My dear girl, you are in exactly the situation you think you are not in, and the distance is exactly what makes it interesting. Temperance carried this conversation home like a stone in her pocket. She carried it up the stairs of Neal Cottage and set it on her desk beside her father's drawings, and she looked at it, and she could not put it down, and she could not pick it up. And it sat there, heavy and true, while she tried to think about drainage angles and thought instead about a man who had opened an entire wing of his house to give her something to criticize. The staircase argument happened on a Thursday. The window on the half landing of the east staircase was beautiful and insufficient, illuminating the stairs for 90 minutes each morning and leaving them dark the rest of the day. A lamp on the landing, Temperance said. Simple, inexpensive, the solution is obvious. "The window has been there for 140 years, the Duke said. He was standing 2 steps above her, which put his face level with hers, and her body knew it before her mind did. Her breath shortened. Her skin prickled along the back of her neck, because she could see the exact gray-green of his eyes from this distance, could see that they were not one color but several. And the several were all focused on her with an attention she had spent 4 weeks pretending was professional. "The window is not the problem," she said. "The problem is that no one has supplemented it. You have a beautiful window and a dark staircase, and for 140 years everyone has admired the window and tripped on the stairs." "No one has tripped." "Pilbeam tripped on Tuesday, he told me. He has started a section in his registry for what he calls architectural hazards insufficiently addressed." The smile that had been circling his features for a month found a place to land, the left corner of his mouth, and stayed for 3 full seconds before propriety chased it away. Her hand, which had been gesturing at the landing wall, had come to rest on the banister very near his, close enough that she could feel the warmth without touching, which was worse than touching, because the not touching was a choice she was making every second, and she was aware of making it. And she suspected he was aware too. "Prosper," she said, because she was too exasperated for formality, and the word arrived before she could stop it, and once it was in the air she could not take it back, because it was true in the way all her observations were true. Neither of them moved. The late afternoon light from the insufficient window sent a column of gold down the stairwell, and for a moment the landing was exactly as bright as it should have been. "Prosper," he said. "It appears the formality has already been adjusted. There is no point in rehanging it." He said this in the tone he used for estate matters, as though the most significant shift in their acquaintance were a question of carpentry, and Temperance wanted very much to laugh, and could not, because something in her chest had shifted in a way that had nothing to do with amusement, and everything to do with the fact that he had just given her permission to call him by his name, and he had done it by comparing the act to rehanging a painting, and he had no idea at all, that it was the most disarming thing anyone had ever said to her. "Temperance," she said, because fair was fair. "Temperance," he repeated, and the word sounded different in his mouth, more deliberate, as though he were testing its weight, and the testing was precise and earnest and thoroughly devastating. She put a lamp on the landing. He did not object. Chapter 4. 3 days later, Temperance stopped coming. She did not send a note. She did not explain. She simply did not arrive on Tuesday, which was the day she always arrived, and the library fire burned down to ash without anyone sitting beside it, and the lamp cast its corrected light on an empty reading chair, and Pilbeam stood in the doorway with his registry and looked at the chair and closed the notebook and went away. Temperance was at Neal Cottage, sitting at her father's desk, looking at his drawings of windows and doorways and load-bearing walls, and she was doing the arithmetic of her situation with the same precision her father had applied to stress calculations. A duke married within his rank, or close to it. A duke who married a woman of no title, no fortune, and no connections did not simply marry beneath him. He remade the social architecture of his life around a gap the county would see and comment on and measure. And the measuring would never stop. She had watched her father be measured her entire life, an architect who was received in great houses as a useful man rather than an equal, and the receiving was always conditional, always accompanied by the particular courtesy that said, "You are welcome here as long as you remember why." And she could not, she would not, stand in a duke's library and be received with that courtesy for the rest of her life. Because the courtesy was a wall disguised as a door, and she would rather have an honest wall. She loved him. She had not wanted to arrive at this conclusion, and she had arrived at it anyway, through observation and evidence and the honest assessment of facts she would rather not face. She loved a man who fixed lamps and compared intimacy to carpentry, and had gray-green eyes that turned gold in staircase light, and who did not know, who genuinely did not know, that he was the funniest person she had ever met. She loved him the way she loved well-proportioned rooms, completely and structurally, and with the full force of an attention that could not be turned off. And she could not have him, because having him would cost him something she was not willing to let him pay. On Wednesday, the Duke sent a note. It said, "The shelving in the East Wing library requires assessment." She held the note. His handwriting was precise and slightly forward-leaning, like a man walking into wind. She did not reply. On Thursday, he sent another. It said, "Pilbeam has identified 3 additional inadequacies in the breakfast room. Your consultation is requested." She put this note beside the first. She did not reply. On Friday, he sent a third. It said, "The lamp has moved." 3 words, "The lamp has moved," which meant, "I moved it, without you, and it is wrong, and I need you to put it right. And the lamp is not what I am talking about, and you know it, and I know you know it. And I am writing this in 3 words because 3 words is all I can manage without saying something that a duke does not write in a note to a woman who has stopped coming to his library." She sat at her desk and read the note 3 times, and pressed her hand flat against the paper and did not reply. And the not replying was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than walking 3 miles in mud, harder than telling a duke his library was dark, harder than being right about everything except the one thing that mattered. At Marden Hall, the Duke of Marden sat in his library in the reading chair she had positioned, beside the lamp she had corrected, surrounded by the books she had reorganized, and he did not read. He sat with his hands on the arms of the chair, and he was very still, and the stillness was not his usual composure. It was the stillness of a man who has just discovered that a room can be perfectly lit and completely empty, and that the emptiness has a weight the lamp cannot address. He was thinking about a woman who had walked 3 miles 9 times to tell him things he did not want to hear, and who had stopped coming, and the absence had the same quality as the library before she fixed the lighting. He had not known the room was dark until she showed him where the light should fall. He had not known his life was dark until she stopped coming. And the fact that he was thinking in her language, in spatial terms, in the vocabulary of light and placement, was either a symptom or a diagnosis, and he was not certain which. Chapter 5. On Saturday, the Duke of Marden walked to Neal Cottage. He told Pilbeam he was going for a walk. Pilbeam looked at the rain, which was steady and gray, and committed to its work in the way that November rain in the English north is always committed. Pilbeam looked at the Duke's boots, which were indoor boots, the kind made for polished floors and carpeted corridors. Pilbeam opened his mouth. Pilbeam closed his mouth. Pilbeam went to the boot room and returned with the Duke's walking boots, which had not been worn in 3 years, and set them by the door without comment, which was the most eloquent thing Pilbeam had ever done. The Duke changed his boots. He did not change his coat, which was a mistake he would understand fully by the 2nd mile. He walked 3 miles, in rain that increased in enthusiasm as he progressed, as though the weather had been informed of his destination and wished to register an opinion about it. The Duke of Marden had never in his life walked 3 miles to anywhere, because dukes have carriages and horses and the entire infrastructure of privilege designed to prevent them from encountering mud, and the mud was a revelation. It was deep and unavoidable, and it pulled at his boots with the insistence of something that did not know it was speaking to a duke and would not have cared if it did. He encountered a lane that needed regrading. He encountered a stone wall that wanted repointing. He encountered a gate that hung at an angle that would have driven Temperance to a state of focused indignation he had come to find more interesting than any opera, and the thought of her indignation made his chest do something his categories could not accommodate, and he walked faster, and the mud let him. By the 3rd mile, his coat was soaked through. His hair was flat against his forehead, and he had developed a detailed understanding of why Temperance Neal's boots were always muddy, and the understanding made him love her more, which was a thing he had not believed possible and which the rain appeared to consider irrelevant. He arrived at Neal Cottage with the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. The cottage was small, a stone house with a slate roof, one tile missing, a garden going to seed with the remains of late roses still holding on, a path that was, in fact, poorly graded, a wooden door that needed painting. It was honest and warm and insufficient, and it was the most beautiful building he had ever seen, because she had made it beautiful by living in it, the way she made every room beautiful, by seeing it clearly and refusing to pretend it was other than what it was. He knocked. He waited. The rain fell on his shoulders with the patience of weather that has nowhere else to be. Temperance opened the door. She looked at him. She looked at the rain on his coat and the mud on his boots and the fact that he was standing at her cottage door, the Duke of Marden at a cottage door, a man who owned 100 rooms standing on the step of a woman who had 4. And she looked at his face, which was not composed, which was not the ducal mask, which was wet and open and slightly out of breath, and her face did something he had never seen it do. It broke. Not into tears, not into drama, into honesty. The last wall she had been maintaining came down, and what was behind it was not what either of them had expected. It was not composure or distance or the professional detachment of a woman who fixes lamps. It was longing. Plain and specific and unglamorous, like the woman herself. Longing that had been there since the first afternoon in the library, and that she had filed under every other category she possessed because she did not have a category for wanting a man she was not supposed to want. And the filing had failed, and the longing was standing in her face like light through a window she could no longer pretend was adequate. The path needs regrading, she said, because she could not say what she actually meant, because what she actually meant was too large for the doorway. I noticed, he said. I have several observations about the path, also the gate and the wall. You are soaked. I am. That is an observation, not a criticism. I chose to walk. You chose to walk 3 miles in the rain. The carriage would have been faster, but the carriage would have been the Duke arriving. I did not want to arrive as the Duke. His voice, which had always carried the precise calibration of a man accustomed to rooms going quiet when he spoke, lost its calibration. What was left was plain and slightly unsteady. I wanted to arrive as the man who cannot read in his own library, because the chair is angled the way you specified, and the lamp is positioned where you placed it, and the dictionary is still open to the word you laughed at, and the room is exactly right, and it is empty, and the emptiness is the only inadequacy in my entire household that I cannot fix by asking you. She stood in her doorway. The rain fell behind him. The cottage was small and warm and smelled of candle wax and the soap she used, and the particular scent of old paper that meant her father's drawings were spread on the desk. And she thought, he walked here. And she thought, he is standing in rain at my door. And she thought, he said he did not want to arrive as the Duke. And she thought about how that sentence, that plain and devastating sentence, was the most honest thing she had ever heard from the most powerful man she had ever known. And the honesty was what made it devastating. And she had spent her entire life being honest, and had never understood, until this exact moment, what it cost. Come in, she said. He came in. He stood in her cottage and water dripped from his coat onto her stone floor, and the dripping was the only sound in the room for a moment, steady and small. And she thought, this is what it sounds like when a duke enters a cottage. And it sounds like rain on stone, and it is the most ordinary sound in the world. He looked at the room. The small desk covered with her father's drawings, the battered Herodotus, the annotated household receipts, the single candle. The careful poverty that was invisible at first glance and obvious at second, the mended curtains, the uneven flagstones, The chair with one leg shimmed with a folded card. She saw him seeing it. She saw him seeing the difference between his 100 rooms and her 4. And she did not look away, because looking away would have been a form of dishonesty. And she was finished with dishonesty, even the kind that protected her. "Your coat is ruined," she said. "It was a good coat. It has been repurposed." Repurposed. As evidence that I am capable of walking 3 miles in the rain like a human being, rather than arriving in a carriage like a title. She almost smiled. She caught it. He saw her catch it, and something in his face softened in a way she had never seen. A softening she had not known was available to a man who held himself so precisely. And the softening was the most intimate thing she had witnessed, in 5 weeks of proximity and near touches and arguments about lamps. "I stopped coming," she said, "because I am in love with you. And a duke cannot marry an architect's daughter without the world taking note of it. And the note will not be kind. And I will not be the reason anyone questions your judgment." "My judgment," he said. "Your judgment, your position, your name." Temperance. A duke who marries beneath him does not simply marry. He builds a crack in his own foundation. And I will not, I cannot, be that crack. "You are not a crack," he said. "You are the foundation." He said it plainly. He said it the way she said things, without ornament, without flourish, as though the truth required no decoration because it was already the right shape. And then he said the rest. "My father told me to ask every person who came to my table what they thought of my estate. He told me a man who is never told the truth is already dead. I have been asking for 15 years, and every person told me it was magnificent. And I thanked them and believed them. And then you walked into my library and told me the lamp was a catastrophe." His hand rose. It hovered near her face, not touching, in the way she had learned was more charged than any touch. "I thought I was looking for honesty. I was not. I was looking for the person brave enough to tell me what was wrong with my life. And you told me, and then you told me again, and again, and I fixed every single thing you named. Because fixing them was the only way I knew to say what I am saying now, which is that I have never, in my life, met anyone who sees things the way you see them. And I do not want to live in a house you have not looked at, and I do not want to eat a breakfast you have not improved, and I do not want to walk through a single room without knowing what you would change about it. Because what you would change about it is always, always right. And the rightness is not why I love you. The rightness is how I found you. And the reason I love you is that you looked at my house and you saw a house. And you looked at me and you saw a man. And no one has ever done either." 1 second. 2. 3. "You should know," she said, and her voice was not steady because steadiness had left her, "that I will never stop having opinions. I am counting on it. I will tell you when things are wrong. I will tell you when the breakfast is repetitive and the library needs reorganizing and the garden path wants regrading. I will occasionally be wrong about the curtains. I will remind you of the curtains at every opportunity. I will tell you things you do not want to hear because they are true and because I cannot stop myself, and because that is how I love things. I criticize them. I see what is wrong and I name it and I fix it. And if you marry me, you are marrying the woman who will rearrange your furniture once a season and have opinions about your drapes until the day she dies." Temperance. I have more observations. I have always had more observations. My entire life is an undelivered registry of things I have noticed that no one wanted to hear. The smile arrived. Not the almost smile. Not the quarter expression that had been circling his features for weeks. A real smile. A full smile. A smile that broke across his face like light through a window that has finally been given a proper lamp beside it. It changed the geometry of his face, the way she changed the geometry of rooms, by revealing what had always been there and had simply needed better lighting. I am asking you to marry me, he said. I am aware that I have phrased it as a series of observations about domestic improvement. I am aware that this is not how proposals are typically delivered. I am also aware that you would find a typical proposal suspicious. I would find it structurally unsound. Then I will not deliver one. I will simply tell you that I walked 3 miles in the rain because I could not sit in a room you made beautiful and watch it be empty. And I am standing in your cottage because this is where you are, and where you are is where the light falls correctly. She kissed him. She kissed him because she had spent 5 weeks not kissing him, and the not kissing had been a structural achievement of immense proportions. And the structure had just failed, completely and without warning. And what was left was her mouth on his and his hands in her hair. His capable, unhurried hands that she had catalogued and filed and wanted. And the rain was still falling outside, and the candle was guttering on the desk, and her father's architectural drawings were beneath their elbows, and his coat was dripping on her floor, and neither of them cared about any of it, because the room was, for the first time in Temperance Neal's 26 years, in exactly the right arrangement. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers, and his breath was unsteady, and his hands were still in her hair, and he said, in the voice of a man who has just had every category he possesses demolished by a woman in a gray dress, "Your cottage has a leaking roof. I know. I will have it repaired. You will not. It is my roof. I will repair it myself when I can afford to. Temperance. If you repair my roof, I will criticize the repair. I will find fault with the tiles and the flashing and the angle of the pitch. It is who I am. I know who you are. That is why I walked 3 miles in the rain." She laughed. She laughed because he was standing in her cottage with ruined boots and soaked hair, making declarations about roofing. And he was doing it with complete sincerity, and he had no idea that he was the funniest man alive, and she was going to spend the rest of her life telling him things he did not want to hear, and he was going to listen to every one. And the listening was the love, had always been the love, from the very first afternoon when she had told him his lamp was a catastrophe and he had asked her to continue. They married on a Tuesday in the library because Temperance had opinions about where a marriage should take place, and her opinion was that it should happen in the room where the story began. The ceremony was small, which was Temperance's preference, and private, which was the Duke's, and it took place beside the reading desk on which the lamp sat in its corrected position, casting warm light over the vows with the even adequacy that had started everything. Lady Burleigh attended and brought her walking stick and said nothing during the vows, which was the most restrained anyone had ever known her to be, though afterward she leaned toward Pilbeam and whispered, with the precision of a woman who has spent 83 years calibrating exactly how far her whispers travel, "She will have that rug replaced by Friday. It has always been the wrong color." Pilbeam wrote this down. He had been taking notes on the entire ceremony, which no one had asked him to do, and which everyone, upon reflection, considered entirely appropriate. The registry, Temperance suspected, would eventually require its own shelf. The marriage settlement, which Temperance had drafted herself, with the assistance of the Duke's solicitor and her own thorough understanding of property law, preserved Neal Cottage as her personal property in perpetuity. The Duke agreed to every clause without negotiation, which surprised the solicitor and did not surprise Temperance, because she knew by now that the Duke of Marden's great talent was listening, and his great discovery was that listening was not weakness, but the strongest thing he had ever done. Mrs. Argent, the cook, provided the wedding breakfast, which featured 9 varieties of bread, because the bride had opinions about breakfast, and the cook had been waiting 6 years to honor them. The toast rack was, Temperance observed, the correct size for the table. She did not mention this. Some observations are best kept to oneself. And a bride who critiques the toast rack at her own wedding breakfast is a bride who has not yet learned the difference between being right and being kind. She would learn it. She would learn it slowly and imperfectly, and the Duke would wait, because waiting was something he did well, and because the woman he had married was worth every inadequacy she would identify along the way. That evening, in the library, Temperance sat in the reading chair and looked at the room she had remade. The lamps were where she had placed them. The shelves were ordered as she had specified. The chair was angled correctly. Beside the reading table lay Johnson's dictionary, open, as it had been from the beginning, to the word candid. Prosper sat across from her, reading a drainage report, because water does not care about interior decoration. He looked up. His eyes, in the lamplight, were gold. "You are staring at the lamp," he said. "It needs to move 1/2 inch to the left." 1/2 inch. The shadow falls across the page at this angle. He stood. He moved the lamp 1/2 inch to the left. He sat down. He looked at her. "Well?" he said. She looked at the light. She looked at the room. She looked at the man who had walked 3 miles in the rain because a carriage would have been the Duke arriving, and he wanted to arrive as a man. "Better," she said. He did not smile. He did not need to. The smile had arrived weeks ago, on a staircase, and it had never fully left. The lamp was, at last, in exactly the right place. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss new stories.